So, you know those paved walkways in a public park? The ones that are like laid out by city planners in these perfectly straight lines?
Oh, yeah. Usually meeting at exact 90-degree angles.
Right, exactly. Like they map it out so it looks super symmetrical and pristine from a bird's eye view.
Beautiful on paper.
Beautiful on paper, yeah. But then if you actually walk through that park a few months later, you always see this diagonal dirt trail just cutting right through the grass.
Yeah, totally.
It's a path worn down by hundreds of footprints from people who, just wanted to get from point A to point B in the most logical way possible.
Right. Urban planners actually have a name for those. They call them desire paths.
Desire paths. I love that.
Yeah, it's this physical, undeniable evidence of the tension between, well, how an environment was designed to be used and how the inhabitants actually choose to navigate it.
And that tension is exactly what we're getting into today on this deep dive, because we are looking at the exact aquatic equivalent of a desire path.
Oh, it really is.
We're exploring this brilliant micro study in environmental adaptation and animal behavior, and it's drawn from a really highly specific primary source.
Super specific.
Yeah, it's a log entry published on July 22, 2026. It's titled Notes-on-Fishkeeping, Part 294, Cave Reluctance and New Bonds in the Aquarium. And it's authored by this really dedicated hobbyist named Ang.
Right. And in this entry, Ang is basically documenting the precise movements and the whole acclimation process of a specific fish species.
The Kribensis Cichlid, right.
Exactly. Scientifically known as pelvicachromis-pulcher.
Pelvicachromis-pulcher, got it. So for everyone listening, even if you have absolutely zero interest in aquariums or fish, stick with us here.
Yeah, trust us on this one.
Because this short entry captures a totally universal struggle. It applies to how we design everything, from like office spaces to digital interfaces.
Absolutely. It's about the friction between the creator and the user.
Right. And it starts with the physical geography of this fish tank. So Ang intentionally placed these artificial caves at the very front of the aquarium.
Which, makes perfect sense from the perspective of the human spectator.
Sure.
Placing structures at the front of a glass box, it prioritizes visibility. You build a habitat there so you can sit in your living room and just, watch the fish interact.
Right. It's prime real estate.
Exactly. Prime real estate designed entirely for human consumption and, aesthetic pleasure.
But the Kribensis Cichlids, and specifically the male fish here, they are completely rejecting that prime real estate. Ang describes them as exhibiting, quote, cave reluctance.
Cave reluctance. It's such a great phrase.
It is. They are completely ignoring these custom-built homes provided for them. And instead, both the male and the female are choosing to hide at the far back of the tank, behind a cluster of coral rocks.
Yep, right in the back.
And reading this, I immediately thought of that classic pet owner experience, where you spend like $80 on a plush, temperature-controlled cat bed.
Oh, I know exactly where this is going.
Right. You put it right in the middle of the living room, and the cat spends the next 3 weeks sleeping in the dirty cardboard shipping box shoved under a dark sofa.
Every time. It happens every time. Because human cognitive bias assumes that comfort and visibility are the highest priorities.
We design for the human spectator at the front.
Exactly. We look at an empty tank or a living room and evaluate it based on aesthetics and its intended function. But the animal looks at that exact same space and maps out threat vectors.
Threat vectors. Okay, I want to dig into that. Because it's so easy for us to look at this closed system, right? Like a glass box in a quiet living room with absolutely no predators.
Right. Totally safe to us.
And we think the fish are just being stubborn. Or maybe skittish. But doesn't this highlight a classic flaw in how we set up habitats? Like, what is actually happening biologically when they reject the open front of the tank?
Well, to understand that, you really have to look at the evolutionary wiring of pelvicachromis-pulcher.
Okay.
These are riverine cichlids. They're originally native to the heavily vegetated, slow-moving waters of West Africa.
Okay, so lots of plants.
Tons of plants. Submerged roots, dense cover. In the wild, their survival basically depends on utilizing riverbanks to avoid larger predators. So when you place a fish like that into a new environment, like Ang describes, their sympathetic nervous system immediately engages.
Meaning they are going straight into fight or flight mode.
Completely. And you have to remember, fish perceive their environment so much differently than we do.
How so?
They have this sensory organ called the lateral line system. It runs down the side of their bodies, and it detects these minute pressure changes and vibrations in the water.
Oh, wow. So they can physically feel the space around them.
Exactly. So the front of a glass aquarium is essentially this massive open water column. To a riverine cichlid, That open space isn't a premium view.
It's a trap.
Yes. It is a 360-degree vulnerability zone. It means potential threats can approach from any angle, and their lateral lines are just being bombarded with the sensory input of an exposed environment.
So standing in the front of the tank is the biological equivalent of standing in the middle of an open field with no cover.
Pretty much.
Their cortisol levels must be just spiking.
Oh, they are heavily flooded with stress hormones. And that is exactly why they bypass those artificial caves at the front and seek out the coral rocks at the far back.
Because the back gives them a wall.
Right. The back wall of the tank provides a solid, impenetrable boundary. It instantly cuts their threat vectors in half. And the complex structure of the coral rocks offers localized cover.
So it's not them being stubborn.
Not at all. They are making a highly rational, neurochemically driven calculation. Survival always overrides the fancy amenities provided by the caretaker.
That makes perfect sense for their initial introduction to the tank. You know, they're freaking out, they need a wall to their backs. But Eng's log entry outlines this really clear behavioral shift over time.
Right, the thaw.
Exactly. This hiding phase behind the rocks isn't permanent. Eng writes that despite the initial reluctance, the male fish has, quote, finally settled down and is now seen roaming within the aquarium tank.
And that transition from hiding to roaming is just a massive ethological milestone.
It means they're getting comfortable.
Yes, it indicates that their nervous systems are downregulating. They are shifting from the sympathetic nervous system, that acute survival mode, into the parasympathetic state.
So they can actually chill out.
Right. They can actually begin to process the environment without the immediate expectation of death. Roaming implies they're mapping the territory, and they're beginning to assert a level of ownership over the space.
And mapping the territory isn't just about figuring out where the glass ends either. Eng has a very specific end goal in mind here with these two fish.
Oh, absolutely.
The entry states, quote, it's good to see that both fish have finally settled down with each other. And that leads to the ultimate hope that both fish can bond and start mating.
Which brings us to this fascinating hierarchy of animal needs. Social behaviors like courting, bonding, and mating, these are high-level luxuries.
Luxuries.
Yeah, they require a massive expenditure of metabolic energy. And crucially, they make the animals extremely vulnerable to distraction.
That sounds a lot like cognitive load.
It's exactly like cognitive load.
Like, you cannot focus on complex social interactions if your brain is entirely occupied with basic survival. I mean, what does this tell us about the prerequisites for bonding?
Well, it's kind of like trying to solve a complex math puzzle while someone is blaring an air horn in your ear.
Right. You just can't do it.
The brain literally cannot allocate resources to higher-level social functions when the amygdala is flooded with threat signals. You cannot force a social bond in an environment that feels biologically unsafe.
So the text implies that finding that hiding spot behind the coral rocks was a mandatory first step before they could focus on each other.
Absolutely. It reframes the entire timeline Eng is observing. The fact that the fish were allowed to stay behind those coral rocks and establish a secure baseline, it wasn't a delay in the process. It was a mandatory prerequisite.
Wow. They had to secure the perimeter.
Right. They had to lower their cortisol levels before they had the cognitive and physical bandwidth to even look at each other as potential mates. By claiming that back area as their undisputed safe zone, they laid the foundation for habitation.
And that foundational security is the only thing that opens the door for the new bonds that Eng mentions in the title.
Exactly. From survival mode to settling in.
But wait, this brings up a logistical question about Eng's next move.
Okay, what's that?
So if the fish have successfully bonded behind the coral rocks, right, and they feel safe there, why is the artificial cave even necessary at this point?
Ah, good question.
Because Eng writes that the next step is to move the terracotta pot to the back of the tank. Can't the fish just stay behind the rocks? Why do they need the pot at all if they are already comfortable?
Okay, so that is a crucial distinction in animal husbandry. It's the difference between a temporary shelter and a breeding environment.
Okay, break that down for me.
So a cluster of coral rocks is porous. It provides a great place for an adult to slip into and break the line of sight from a predator.
Sure.
But if the ultimate goal is mating, the architectural requirements change drastically. Kribensis Cichlids are what we call cave spawners.
Cave spawners.
Yep.
So they need an actual cave.
Yes. They need to lay their eggs on the ceiling or walls of a secure enclosed space to protect the fry once they hatch.
Ah, I see. So a porous rock pile is terrible for defending fry because a predator could just slip in through any number of tiny gaps?
Precisely. You'd be defending a dozen tiny doors. A terracotta pot, however, offers a single entry cavity. It creates a highly defensible choke point.
Oh, that's smart. The parents only have to guard one door.
Right. So Aang realizes that the fish physically need the architecture of the pot for breeding, but they absolutely refuse to utilize it in the exposed front of the tank.
Right, so if the user rejects the interface, you don't blame the user, you change the interface.
Exactly. You adapt to their preferences.
So Aang decides to move the habitat to the fish. The text says, quote, moving forward, the next step's probably to move the artificial caves, especially the terracotta pot, to the back.
And that is the pivot.
But the action plan doesn't stop with simply relocating the pot. Aang adds this highly mechanical detail, noting the plan to move the pot and, quote, backfill them with substrates, but that needs some further adjustments.
Okay, and that concept of backfilling the substrates, that is the most profound environmental engineering tactic in this entire log entry.
Okay, let's unpack this backfilling idea, because backfill them with substrates sounds like serious construction work.
It kind of is.
I mean, substrate, in this context, that means the gravel or the sand or the aquatic soil that lines the bottom of the aquarium, right?
Yep, that's the substrate.
So if Aang is just trying to give them a single entry cave in their preferred safe zone, why isn't it enough to just drop the terracotta pot on top of the sand next to the rocks? Like, why the need for further adjustments, like burying or banking the soil around it? Is Aang trying to camouflage it?
Well, it's deeper than camouflage. It's about structural integrity. Because a loose terracotta pot sitting on top of the sand feels artificial and temporary to the fish.
Really? Just because it's sitting on top?
Yeah, a freestanding object is structurally vulnerable. It might rock or shift in the water current. It can vibrate when outside acoustic energy hits the tank.
Oh, and you said they feel those vibrations with their lateral lines?
Exactly. To a fish whose sensory apparatus is designed to detect stability, a loose pot feels like pitching a flimsy tent on concrete.
It lacks permanence.
Yes. But when you backsell it with substrate, when you physically alter the terrain to bank dirt up around the sides and partially bury the structure,
Yeah.
you literally change the physics of the object.
Wow.
You dampen the acoustic vibrations, you anchor it against the water current. You are transforming it from this foreign, dropped-in object into a deeply rooted geological feature of the landscape.
You are artificially engineering the sensation of a 1,000-year-old riverbank cave.
That is exactly what you're doing. Aang isn't just moving furniture. Aang is conducting localized masonry to ensure the habitat meets the intense psychological requirements of a breeding pair of cichlids.
That is wild.
They rejected the pot initially, not just because it was in the front, but because it lacked that dense, immovable security they naturally crave for a nursery.
You know, I think we can formalize this into what we could call the substrate principle.
The substrate principle.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
Right. Like, true design isn't just about placing an object in a space. It is about altering the foundation so that the user adopts it naturally. And this scales up so perfectly to macro-level human systems.
Well, absolutely.
I mean, think about UX designers building software or managers trying to implement a new workflow for their team.
It happens constantly in product design. A developer builds a new feature, they place it front and center on the dashboard because they're so proud of it.
Oh, yeah, prime real estate.
And then they watch the analytics as users completely ignore it in favor of some obscure backdoor workaround.
The digital equivalent of hiding behind the coral rocks.
Exactly. And the standard ego-driven response from the developer is to blame the user, to send out passive-aggressive memos demanding people use the new feature, or to artificially restrict the workaround to force them into the new path.
They leave the cave in the front of the tank and try to force the fish into it,
Yes.
which never works.
But applying the substrate principle means acting like Aang. It means observing the actual data, those desire paths your users are creating, like we talked about at the top of the show.
Right.
It's accepting that your initial design violated some core instinct or workflow requirement, and then doing the heavy lifting to move the interface to where the users already feel secure.
And crucially, not just moving it, but backfilling it, integrating it into their existing foundation so it feels native to their actual process.
So Aang prioritizes the success of the environment over the purity of the initial design.
The human yields to the biological reality of the inhabitant, which is how it should be. Wow. Let's pull all of this together. We started with a very simple observation in an aquarium log. Just two Kribensis Cichlids refusing to use the beautiful front row homes provided for them, experiencing cave reluctance because their lateral lines and stress hormones demanded the security of the back wall.
And we saw how that period of hiding was not a failure of acclimation, but a biological imperative. It was the necessary downregulation of their nervous systems, clearing the cognitive load so they could actually focus on building bonds.
Right. And then we watched the caretaker recognize that reality. Aang didn't try to net the fish and force them to the front. Aang observed their desire path, moved the architectural necessity, the terracotta pot, to their safe zone.
And committed to the physical engineering of backfilling the substrate to mimic the dense security of nature.
It really is a masterclass in adapting an environment to the user rather than demanding the user adapt to the environment.
It is. And as we conclude this analysis, I want to direct your attention to a really subtle detail in the metadata of this source, a detail that honestly recontextualizes the entire scope of what we've discussed today.
Okay, what did we miss?
Look at the title of the log entry. It is Notes on Fishkeeping, Part 294.
Wait, part 294.
Part 294.
Oh.
Consider the massive scale of that number. If the painstaking observation of cave reluctance, the decision to relocate a single terracotta pot, and the manual backfilling of substrate is merely the focus of Part 294 of this journal,
Yeah.
what does that imply about the nature of environmental design?
Oh, man. It implies that it never actually ends.
Exactly. We
Wow.
always fall into the trap of viewing design as a destination. You set up the aquarium, you launch the software, you establish the corporate policy, and you assume the work is finished.
But it's not.
No. Part 294 proves that husbandry, whether you are caring for a biological ecosystem, managing a team of humans, or frankly even cultivating a relationship, is an endless iterative process.
There is no final state of perfection.
Right. There is only a continuous cycle of observation, hypothesis, and micro-adjustments.
Wow. We are all on part 294 of something, aren't we?
We really are.
The perfectly symmetrical walkways that we map out in our heads are always going to encounter the messy, instinctual reality of the people walking them. The work is never just building the path. The work is watching where the dirt trails form and having the humility to pave where the footprints already are.
Perfectly said.
So as you navigate your own systems and environments this week, look closely at your friction points. Notice where the people around you are retreating to the coral rocks, and ask yourself if you are stubbornly demanding they come to the front of the tank, or if you are willing to move the terracotta pot and do the heavy lifting to backfill the substrate. Keep observing, keep iterating, and keep diving deep.